Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Shell of MBAadmit.com. It is always a pleasure to be with the GMAT Club for another webinar. Today, we are talking about successful EMBA profiles, meaning what does it take to get into some of these top EMBA programs? And I'm going to answer some of the more commonly asked profile questions with regard to these 5 EMBA programs, which are Wharton, Columbia, Kellogg, MIT, and Booth. Okay, so again, I'm Dr. Shell of MBAadmit.com. I just want to tell you a bit about our company before we get into the discussion. Our company has been around for 21 years, and I personally have been doing admissions advising for 30 years. We have worked with all the top EMBA programs and MBA programs, and we've had great success. We have a team of advisors from top universities. Candidates who work with our company are able to work directly with me, and I have Harvard admissions experience as well as a background with McKinsey and Morgan Stanley. And we have expert writers that are there to help you design outstanding essays. We've worked with all the top EMBA programs and MBA programs with great success. Here's a list of some of those. And we welcome you to come to our website if you're curious about how we think you'll fare in the EMBA admissions process, and either just send your resume to us or fill out the profile evaluation form on our website, and we're happy to give you feedback. So one thing I want to point out before we get into the discussion further is that the fact that our company has been around for 21 years means that we predate all the top EMBA programs. And that means that we've seen them each from year one. We've seen, what they started out like, what their preferences are, how things have changed over time, what their nuances are of admissions. And we're able to bring all of that to candidates who are applying to the EMBA programs. So which are the most popular EMBA programs? I just wanted to give you a sense of what we see, and we do handle far more EMBA candidates than many of the top MBA admissions consulting companies. But these are the ones that tend to be the most popular among candidates. So Wharton, Kellogg, Columbia, Booth, MIT, Haas, UCLA, Duke, Darden, NYU, Yale, and then Stanford MSX. Stanford MSX technically is not an EMBA program, but it is targeted to that same older candidate. It's a one-year full-time program. So today we are actually going to focus in on the 5 in blue. We'll let you know if we're going to be offering other webinars that address some of those other schools, which are quite popular as well. But today we're going to focus in on these top 5. So overview, how do students compare in terms of those that are admitted to these top schools? Now, this information is from websites, and all except for the target EA, which executive assessment in that last column, that we are getting from representatives from the school and what they've said. But this gives you a overall high-level snapshot. You'll look at the work experience years, and you'll notice that Columbia is quite small in terms of number of experience years, so 9 years on average. And then MIT is the highest in terms of the average work experience years of students that are matriculating, and that is 17 years. It sort of correlates with age. So MIT has the oldest average age, which is 41 on average. And Columbia in this list has the youngest average age, which is 33. Women are underrepresented at all of the schools, you'll notice. International, the numbers that these schools put on their websites, I think are a little bit misleading because we have a lot of international candidates who are permanent residents of the USA, which don't show up on these numbers necessarily. And we also have people who may have been from other countries that recently became US citizens. And so if you were actually to go visit these schools, I think you would have the impression that they all have larger numbers of international students. But that is what they've put on the website. Booth does not list that out specifically, but these other schools do indicate what they have in terms of international students. And then the target executive assessment score. These days, the executive assessment test is much more popular among candidates than the GMAT or the GRE. The reason is because it is much easier to prepare for. And so most of the candidates that we see have shifted over to the executive assessment. There's always that question about what is good enough. this is what the schools say in terms of what they're looking for in general. I would have to say that when we give advice to candidates, we are looking at their profile because we do know that the numbers will vary based on the profile. And so Wharton may accept 156 from some candidates, but they wouldn't accept it from others, and they prefer 160 with certain other candidates. And so we kind of understand those nuances. And again, if we're giving you a profile evaluation, we're happy to share with you what we think they're going to want from you, given your specific background, your qualifications, and so forth. But this is a high-level snapshot about what the students look like at these programs. One big takeaway is that people often worry. It's called executive MBA. And so do they have to be a super, in the C-suite essentially to be able to get into these programs? And the answer is no. We actually get many, many young candidates. Our typical candidates are between the ages of 29 and about 38. And we have success with even the 29-year-olds. So from my perspective, someone who has 5 years of experience or more can be viable. In very exceptional cases, someone can get in with 3 or 4 years. Usually that will be an entrepreneur who's had a lot of success. But so just your age does not necessarily have to keep you out, whether you're young or whether you're old and in your 50s. Of course, some people say 50s is not old, but from the admissions perspective, that is on the older side. So just know that you shouldn't assume that your age will put you out of range for these schools. So I want to go through some commonly asked questions, profile questions about these schools, and give you our insights based on what we've seen over all these years, looking at all these programs from their very first year. So the first question that we often hear is, do these programs admit candidates from a broader range of industries than they might see in the full-time programs? And the answer is yes. You will find that there's more diversity. And so Wharton is known for focusing in on finance at the full-time level. If you were to go to the EMBA program, you're going to see a very diverse, much more diverse set of candidates than that. So they take a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people from tech. The same would be true of Booth. It also has a reputation of focusing in on finance at the full-time level. At the EMBA level, there's a much broader diversity of students. So those full-time sort of preferences, you don't fully see those reflected at the EMBA level. So for candidates of different backgrounds, you can look at each of those and know that if you go to the program, you're going to have a great diversity of background among the students. Another question is, are some of these EMBA programs more open to younger candidates? The answer, as I said, is yes. We've had people as young as 25 get into some of these top programs. Usually that will be an entrepreneur who's done very well. And so the ones that tend to more routinely be very receptive to younger candidates are Columbia and Kellogg. There are others in the EMBA top 15 that are very open as well, like Cornell, NYU. And so there are others, but of the 5 that we're talking about today, these are the 2 that tend to be the most receptive. Which ones tend to prefer more senior candidates? And by senior, I mean either by age or by title. The 2 of the 5 that we're talking about are MIT and Wharton. MIT by far has the preference for the older candidate compared in this set of 5. It tends to want someone who has a great deal of seniority in their title. And they are very discouraging on the whole for younger candidates. We have had many younger candidates be successful, but those candidates do have really strong leadership experience and, many times have just grown up through an organization and are wearing multiple hats in terms of their responsibilities, and therefore can be, full contributors in a classroom that tends to have older candidates. So age does not necessarily rule you out completely. MIT has said in past years that about 15% of their class, is that younger, maybe between 29 and 33 in terms of age. And so it's not impossible, but it is harder at MIT if you're younger. And Wharton, it also tends to prefer an older candidate, but in their definition, older would be, in your mid 30s or early 40s. And so, you can just know that if you're in that age, you have not aged out and you actually may be more attractive because you have more work experience. Number four would be, what if you have a low GPA? So many people, they didn't either focus in college or they had demands on them and they just did not perform well. And yet they blossomed in their professional years. And so they really want a degree that will reflect the professional success. And they worry that a low GPA can keep them out of top schools. And so, of course, the question is, which of the schools will be open to them, or which ones will be harder to access. The two that are harder to access are MIT and Wharton. They do keep a very high bar in terms of academics. And so on the GPA, even if it's 20 years in the past, they will care that you didn't do well. What they'll want is just evidence that your analytical skills are where they need to be to succeed in the program. So we have had plenty of candidates who've had low GPAs, but lots of years of professional success. And then we're able to point to other things, whether it was the nature of the work they're doing, very quantitative, or courses that they had taken since college, to be able to demonstrate that they have the analytical abilities. Between MIT and Wharton, I think Wharton is harder in this regard because it's a very quantitative program. And so they are concerned that students won't be able to get through the program if their skills are not strong enough. MIT just keeps that higher bar because it does want to be known to be a little bit more exclusive as an EMBA program. But again, when you've had tremendous professional success, I have found that that is the most important factor. The next question, what about the standardized test score? So if you just cannot manage to get a very good score, is that going to keep you out? Of the five that we're discussing, the one that is the pickiest is by far Wharton. And so Wharton, again, is a very quantitative program. So they're not doing this just to do it. They're doing it because they know if someone does not have the skills, they may not get through the program. And so they really want to make sure that those skills are in place. They can have a wonderful candidate, but if that candidate just does not have a satisfactory EA score, they're more concerned with quant than anything else. And so for them, a quant of 10 is sort of rock bottom. They'd prefer to see 12 to 14 on quant. And then overall, of course, 155 is more desirable. They do let in people with 152. I think that 150 is on the edge, but it just depends on what the overall candidacy looks like. But just know that they're pickier than most of the other schools. In terms of other schools that don't even require a standardized test score, Kellogg and MIT are the ones in this list of five. There are other schools as well that do not require any standardized tests. That would be Cornell, NYU, USC. And so just know that if you're someone who just simply doesn't want to take a test or doesn't think that they do well on those tests, you can look at those programs because they do not require any sort of test whatsoever. The sixth question that I'm going to respond to today is, which of these programs is hardest overall in terms of admissions? Of the five that we're discussing today, MIT and Wharton would be the hardest. In my opinion, MIT is the hardest overall of all the schools, even beyond this five. And the reason I say that is they are so picky in multiple ways. So let's take a look at some of those things. With MIT, they keep a much higher academic bar than many other schools. They want an older candidate. So even if there is a younger candidate, if they fill up with enough older candidates, that's who they prefer. And so the younger candidate is disadvantaged, even if they are very qualified. And then they have a very rigorous interview. They typically will do 2 interviews back to back. And they are what we call behavioral interviews, which means that they're asking you a lot of questions about how you would act or make decisions or behave in certain situations. For people who have less work experience, they have less to draw from to respond to those well. And so when we get older entrepreneurs, it's super easy to get through that interview because they have so much experience in so many different ways, and they can easily pick out examples of what they did. For the younger candidate with less experience, it's just harder to respond. We coach our younger candidates very well. This past year, we had every single candidate 100% success rate at MIT EMBA, and we had some young candidates in that. So we will coach them well through that interview. But you need to make sure that you prepare for that very well. One more thing I should have put on this slide is that another reason MIT is so difficult is the questions themselves in the application are meant to weed out candidates that don't have the right quality of experience. And so you have to be very careful, especially if you're a younger candidate, that you are responding to those questions with what they will perceive as the right quality of work experience. So for instance, they ask the question, explain a time where you introduced an idea that changed the way that your company approached opportunities or business. Now, a consultant, think about this, a consultant who is younger. So say that they're at a top company, Bain or McKinsey, but they're younger, they could even be, right below partner. They could talk about how they introduced ideas that changed the client, but not necessarily ideas that changed their company, Bain or McKinsey, because they're so junior that they probably haven't done that yet. And so the question is weeding out that candidate. So that candidate needs to strive hard to have an example that they can talk about so that they can do well through the admissions process. So just know that MIT is a very, challenging application, and you should prepare that very well. Wharton is among the hardest simply because its academic bar is also very high. So some people, we get candidates with GPAs as low as 2.3. We can get them into Columbia. We may or may not be able to get them into Wharton. It just depends on the overall picture. That's a candidate that we would want to work with and strategize with. And if all goes well and they can present credentials aside from that GPA, they should do well with Wharton. But if they're not willing to take those steps to show other metrics, other qualifications, they would have more of a difficult time with Wharton. So just that high academic bar. Also the same with the fact that Wharton does want a higher standardized test result. And they will, if they see someone they like who does not have that score, they'll give the person more time to try to get it up. But again, their understanding is that their program is so rigorous that if your skills are not in place, you probably won't fare well. And so they just want to make sure you're there before you start. So Wharton also has less tolerance with regard to soft spots in the professional profile. And by that, I mean that sometimes people bounced around industries. They weren't quite sure what they wanted to do. And then maybe in the last 3 years, they really found that right place and they blossomed. That situation may not be problematic at other schools. Columbia, Booth, you probably would have an easier time. Wharton would tend not to like that very much. And so you have to handle that well. You need to write your resume in a certain way to de-emphasize it. You need to write your essays a certain way. And so if you don't know how to do that before you're applying, you may have a problem with admissions. And then also, they prefer to have people who are slightly older. They definitely value 8 years and up in terms of experience. And so the younger candidate will have a bigger microscope on them, and they're just going to have to try harder with regard to what the recommendations say, how the essays are written, to make sure that they can fare well. Now, both of these schools, MIT and Wharton, they get a lot of applicants who are Indian foreign national male candidates. And for that reason, they weed out many qualified candidates. That's another thing that makes them harder. And so some of those are applicants who are, just really impressive figures, but the school just gets so many that they choose to limit, I hate to even say it that way, but that's the reality, limit the number of admits that they're going to give to candidates with that profile. So that's something also to note in terms of odds of success. Okay, number 7, which of these programs is more receptive to entrepreneurs or to engineers/tech candidates? All of the 5 that we're discussing are receptive to entrepreneurs as well as engineers and tech candidates. And the only caveats I would say would be these that are listed below, that MIT will weed out more young engineers and tech candidates because they get so many that they would prefer to get people that are in more advanced decision-making roles. Wharton will tend to weed out qualified candidates of that profile simply because of the volume that they get. So it's not that they are not qualified to be there. The school is just simply trying to limit the number that they're admitting. And then Columbia tends to want to see candidates of that profile who are in the finance space. So if they're not in the finance space, they may have a more difficult time getting into Columbia. Next is are some of these receptive to underrepresented minorities? Are they particularly receptive? And of the 5, all of them are, because the number of candidates who apply who are of the underrepresented minorities, so Latino, African American, there are even countries that are underrepresented. Because of the smaller numbers, the school wants the diversity, and they'll be definitely, very happy to see a qualified candidate. In terms of number 9, what about women? Are these schools open to women? You noticed on that earlier slide that the percentage of women is much smaller than half. And so that's not because the schools are not welcoming, it's because women are not applying in the same numbers. And that, of course, is probably a reflection of the balancing of family and career that happens more with women, some argue, than others. And so because of that, there's just fewer applications from women. And so the schools are very happy to see qualified women candidates, and they are going to be, trying to recruit those that are very qualified and will add to the class. And then the last one I'm going to answer today. And again, after this webinar, I'm more than happy to answer in Q&A some questions that you have. But the number 10 is, do I need a leadership title and a lot of direct reports to gain admission to these top EMBA programs? And the answer is really, it depends. It depends on, your experience. It depends on your overall profile. And quite frankly, it depends on the application. So even when we get someone who has a junior title, if they can convey truly outstanding work experience, where they're showing that they know business best practices, they know leadership best practices, they have a lot to add to a class, that person can do well even though they don't have a more advanced sounding title, and even if they don't have direct reports. And in terms of direct reports, it's also the case that you can show leadership in ways other than managing direct reports. And you can also even show managerial skills in ways other than managing direct reports. And you need to go out of your way to do that through the essays, through your resume. But because of all those factors, even if you don't have a very advanced sounding title, you can do well in these EMBA programs. All right, just one aside before I bring this part of the webinar to an end, I just wanted to comment on EMBA rankings. People will always say, okay, well, I'm looking at these top 5, or I'm looking at these top 10, and I think I can apply to 4 of them. How should I think about rankings? What I would say is that there are organizations that rank EMBA programs. So US News and World Report, you can go there and you can search on EMBA rankings and you'll get a list. That list will change slightly year to year. But what I always remind the candidate is, at the end of the day, the EMBA, Executive MBA, is your route to the MBA. So the degree that you get at the end of the day is called the MBA. So on your resume, you'll have MBA from that school. And so your brand is going to be, the long-term brand will be the brand of the business school. And so even if one of the programs you might think has a curriculum a little bit more suited to you, you should definitely weigh that. That's important. That's why you're going to the school. But the brand is what you're going to carry. So is that brand of the school what you want or not? And so just bear that in mind. You're going to be a Wharton MBA, you're going to be a Cornell MBA, you're going to be an NYU MBA, you're going to be a Columbia MBA. And so don't give too much weight to the short-term ranking of the EMBA program, because in the longer term, it's the ranking of the school that is going to carry with you. So think about all that as you make your choices. All right, you're more than welcome to contact us. Again, we're happy to do a profile evaluation for you. Just come to our website, fill in the profile evaluation form, or you can also just send your resume to us. This is our contact information as well. And I'm happy to take some Q&A questions now. I'm going to have to stop sharing my screen so I can read some of those. So it was nice talking to you, and let's do some Q&A. Okay, so what are the best options to get into marketing or brand management. Now, the way that this question is phrased, it sounds like you're trying to transition into marketing. And be careful when you're applying to the schools, because many of them want to see that you're going to continue where you are. So that can be handled different ways, and I'm more than happy to comment on that more if someone wants to contact us at our website. But in terms of marketing, of the 5 that I discussed today, Kellogg is the one that has the strong reputation in marketing. So you can take a look at that program. It's a great school, amazing candidates. We've seen amazing candidates go there. So we know that you would have a very talented cohort, and that's a great school to choose. Any additional questions here? Okay. Okay, so who is going to be more receptive to candidates with 8 to 10 years of CPG experience across sales and brand management in multiple countries? That's a broad question, and I think all of the schools that we're discussing today, all 5 of them would be very receptive to that experience. And so the question then becomes, what's the rest of the profile? Do you have a strong GPA? Do you have strong recommendations? What is the company that you're working for? Is it large or small? And so those things would impact your odds of success at these top schools. But in general, it sounds like you have great experience. All the schools really appreciate the international experience. So I think that you have a lot going for you just based on this. And 8 to 10 years is plenty of experience for all the top 5 that I talked about. And when I'm saying top 5, I'm talking about the 5 that we chose to talk about today. They're not necessarily the top 5 in terms of ranking. All right, other questions? Okay, so I get a question about what are the acceptance rates at these schools. The schools do not publish the acceptance rates. So I can answer that in multiple ways. I can tell you that MIT is the pickiest. They've been trying to establish themselves as the ones that have the highest rejection rate. So just know that when you're going forward with that school, that's one of your schools of choice. The other schools, I can say that over time, they've been getting more difficult, because with the introduction of the executive assessment, which is about 3 or 4 years old at this point, because it is an easier test to prepare for than the GMAT, the numbers of applicants went up significantly. And so for schools like Columbia and Wharton that require a standardized test, their volume of applications went up significantly with the introduction of the executive assessment. The byproduct is that the schools that don't require it, like Kellogg and MIT, also got that same pool of new applicants were applying there as well. And so all of the schools experienced an increase in applications. And because of that, then the schools became more picky about who they would accept. And so you started to see more of those schools not willing to, just take anyone who's applying, or not even take the majority of who's applying. And so you just bear in mind that it's getting harder, and just get a good assessment of your own credentials. But what we've seen is that your professional experience is the most important. So even if you have flaws in the academic profile or in the standardized test profile, you need to just put the application together marvelously. And if you do that, just a marvelous application, you should be able to override some of the weaknesses in your profile at many of those great schools. Okay, so the visa rules, I think you need to check with each of those schools in terms of what the visa looks like. I do know that some candidates who want to be trying to transition to USA, obviously they're not here right now, so they might be outside the country and sort of wanting to transition to the USA through school. Those candidates will tend to focus on 1-year full-time programs that are targeted for older candidates. And some of those would be Stanford MSX, Kellogg has one, Cornell has one, and MIT has one. And so, that's just one route that some people try to take. But yes, in terms of the visa rules, I'll let you address the schools directly about that stuff. Is it possible to change careers with an EMBA? There's the reality of what happens, and there's also the reality of what the school wants to happen. The school would prefer that you're not trying to change careers, at least many of them, and you need to know which ones, have that attitude and which ones don't. But over time, the schools have seen that people want to use an EMBA for that purpose. And so some schools that in the past had said you could not use their career services, meaning you couldn't be using it to try to get, interviews and so forth, they changed that. And so all of the schools, to my knowledge today, will allow you to use the career services. But, many of them do have a preference for candidates who are not trying to change careers. What I've seen with my candidates is that those that want to change careers, they get their admission and then they do what they want once they're there, and they've been able to make some pretty significant changes. So for instance, I had one candidate who had been in charge of technology for a US state government, and he went into one of these schools and came out, in a very high level position in terms of in charge of global technology for one of the largest fast food restaurants worldwide. And so it was a huge shift. He went from sort of the government sector to private and very high up. So these things can happen. And, it's really up to you to get in there and then start networking, get to the career services, get access to the companies and the recruiters. But many people do use the EMBA for that purpose. Okay, so let me read this out. So am I correct in assuming that a full-time MBA is a better option for a career change, even for older candidates? No, you're not correct in multiple ways. First of all, many of the top MBA programs simply will not entertain an application from an older candidate. So if you are 35, in most cases, the top 10 are not going to seriously consider your application because they feel that you've aged out of the pool. And so that means that the EMBA or the part-time are your main routes. And so so that's that. I mean, so as I said, many people older in their careers decide they want to change. And so an MBA is a good route for that, but you're going to be doing more of the work on your own because, you're older, and many of the people in the EMBA programs are not changing careers. They're staying with the companies they're with. And so the program isn't built to help you change careers, but it does have resources that you can proactively use to make that happen. Okay, next question. Okay, so what are some good international candidate friendly EMBA programs? I would say all of them. I mean, I don't have, when I was putting together that initial table that presented the statistics of international students, I was very surprised at how low the numbers are. I believe that they do not have the permanent residents in that, because I think if you were to actually visit these programs, you would think that there's about 55% international students in them. And so I would say all of them. We have not ever had a problem with an international candidate in terms of getting access to these programs because of their being an international student. In many ways, I think it can help you because when you think about it, the people that are going into these EMBA programs are local to the school, at least local enough that they can get to the school. So even if it's MIT, most likely the person is, resident in the USA. And so for someone to be truly international status is unusual. And I do get some people who are in other countries and will fly in once a month or twice a month from the foreign country to attend the program. But it's more unusual to have a pure international candidate. And so in some ways it makes you underrepresented, which helps you in the admissions process. So I would say, again, I've had no issue whatsoever with being international as being a negative. The only way that it's a negative is when, again, it's an Indian foreign national male, because of the volume of very qualified candidates, which means that the school will weed out more qualified candidates in that type of pool than otherwise. And again, even that statement, which I just said, is true mostly only for Wharton and MIT. I don't have problems at all with the Indian Foreign National candidate trying to get into schools like Booth and Kellogg. I know it's harder, but with a strong application, success is definitely possible. So next question, any other questions? Okay, so I'm going to, okay, sure. I do want to answer one additional one that I saw come into my website. One question was, what do I do if I have a low GPA and a low standardized test score? And the response is actually different than what you probably think. And so what we will normally think is best is, if you are interested in these schools, to target a school that does not have a standardized test requirement. So say you went out and you took the EA, you get 138, you just can't get it above 138. You know that obviously that's going to cause a rejection at most schools. We would say, don't go to the schools that don't require a standardized test score, because then you only have one weakness, which is the GPA. And then you're trying only to override that one weakness. And so that would be the smarter strategy, because some people say, okay, well, should I go try to take the GMAT? And it takes a long time to study for that. And I still can't do well. And then what should I do get, so they just trying to figure out, how do you work with that low standardized test score? It's just easier if some of the ones that don't require it are attractive to you, because as I said, you only at that point have one weakness, and you're just overriding that one weakness. And we have found that most schools, aside from Wharton and MIT, are open to candidates, even if they have a low GPA, if they can show a metric since then. It could be a quantitative course, where they can show, look, I did well, and so I have the skills that I need to succeed. All right, so that is today's webinar. It was definitely wonderful speaking with you. I'm more than happy to take questions for anyone who wants to contact us at the website. I'm also more than happy to do profile evaluations if you would like our feedback. And our services, I think everyone, if you know a little bit about our company, you know that we're priced at about 50% of what our competitors are. So we're known to be very reasonable in our pricing. So feel free to go to our website, mbaadmit.com, and take a look at the packages we offer. And if you have any other questions, of course, feel free to reach out to us at the website. Thank you so much again to GMAT Club for hosting this event, and I look forward to the next one. Take care.